The second was to make sure that we had a way to communicate and identify all the employees who were operating in
be able to identify that specific piece of DNA that has become mutated.
You need to identify the moments in a process when you can actually.
I identify as a woman of color. I straddle two worlds.
The only trick is that you've got to identify the best, worthiest thing.
What advice do you have to us to help identify our own narrative and tell it in a better story?
Definitely. Mind increasingly as I tried to identify what the hell's going on here.
And we simply started to try and identify what cues actually predict real.
Said many people want to identify with something other than the way they were designated at birth.
There and learning how to identify them. I also think.
You said something in the book that I identify with very much. You say, I found media.
However you identify yourself, that we owe our ancestors, right? We owe those people.
And it's great to be able to identify with someone who kind of had that same experience. Mm-hmm. And
to publicly identify someone as gay or lesbian was still viewed as a potential insult and a serious threat.
In which you could identify with. So you were identifying with certain policies.
It takes 3 data points to identify any human. We're all special snowflakes.
They were as good as their word. They'd find your body and identify it and see to it that it was properly buried.
Church. And so what we work to do is to identify those silent sympathizers and then to.
Each element has specific colors, helping scientists identify elements like hydrogen, which emits mainly red light.
we are go for main.
In 1990.
Super bosses being able to identify other super bosses. But what about someone who's...
They say in much of Europe, eaters can identify the region and the month by what's on the menu.
Things I'm doing. Let me focus on what I do need. Let me change how I think and identify me. I'm a vibrant, healthy, strong woman who values.
Moment faster. So, you know, those are the kind of things. Once you identify it, I actually think the tactics.
I can't identify the person in the Zuni person in the middle. So,
particularly in Western Europe, who identify much more closely with Israel.
People identify as independents. These are folks that are
processes in our institutions. We can identify where bias lies, and there are 17 intervention
mechanism through which you try to identify that to avert course.
Sure. So how do you...
5 years out as a group of countries, Mark, identify as ambitious, fragile, and new.
Correct. You have to be able to identify all of the properties of a square. That's what we mean when there's...
and identify whole truths, even things we already know to be true, to give us...
I'm identified as a Republican, but I'm not involved in party politics.
To identify what metabolic condition they have.
Metrics to identify in looking for embezzlement is
pathically identify with other groups. And
It's described as what we would like to do is identify a patient at birth, perhaps through a newborn screen.
I'm trying for 20 years to identify